What's up, guys? Sorry it's been a minute. I meant to upload sooner, but life got in the way. I've had a lot of stuff going on with work and family and everything in between, so it's been, I don't know, a couple weeks since I posted anything. I'm gonna try and be better about that, but it's just been crazy. I had a wedding last week I was in and a bunch of other family stuff, and so the project kind of took a back seat for a little bit, but we're back at it today. I'm gonna try and make up for it. I think this is gonna be a really good video today. It's gonna be a little longer, a little more technical. We're gonna build out the front half of the fuel system for the truck. I've also been waiting on parts, so that was part of the reason why it took so long. So I have all the parts to do the front half, so we're gonna do the front half, show you how to do that, how to make some AN lines, and kind of my reasoning and thought process behind the parts I chose, why I chose them, and hopefully maybe you guys will learn something. Alright, so let's kind of go over what we're doing here. So as you can see, got the high ram taken off the truck. It was just sitting on the engine, mocked up. You probably saw the tape I had covering the intake ports. So what this is we're building the truck to hopefully make, the base goal was 700 wheel. I wanted to overbuild everything so that way we weren't leaning on parts at, you know, like 90% efficiency or whatever to make the power goal. So the idea was overbuild it and then underuse it so it lasts longer. And on the occasion that you want to turn it up to that higher number, you could. So this is basically going to be a 4-figure fuel system. So everything here should be enough to get us to 1,000 on E85. Definitely, if we were using gas, and assuming we could tune it to that high of a number, it should get us there easily. So a lot of this stuff is just things that I've researched over the past couple of years of how to do this. I took a lot of cues from Motion Raceworks. I use a huge chunk of their parts on my truck. Their stuff just works. It's expensive, but it fits. And they've done this enough. They kind of have an idea of, you know, how things are supposed to work and what does and what doesn't. So the stuff's really expensive. You really don't want to be figuring things out as you go. It's especially if you're a guy like me where you're doing this on, you know, a normal guy budget and you're not a rich dude. Okay, so for parts, I'll try and explain what's going on and what we're doing. So this is, to be clear, this is just the front half of the fuel system. So things we're not doing today: the feed and return lines back to the tank, and the fuel pump and hanger. And actually I'm running dual fuel pumps, but I don't have that stuff yet. So this is just the front half in the engine bay. Obviously I'm using a Holley high ram. This will apply to pretty much any V8 fuel system and even some 4-cylinder stuff. But for my purpose in this video, like, this is mainly for LS related fuel systems. So what we've got is, this came at the recommendation of one of my other friends, fuel injector development 2200s. So these are a Bosch core. They've got the extended top hat on there to work with these fuel rails. Obviously it's for E85, that's why we're running such a big injector. We're using all Fergola fittings. Motion Raceworks sells this brand. It works pretty good. I've installed a couple of them. This is standard AN fittings. What we're going to do is dash 10 from the tank. From and to the tank is going to be dash 10, and then it'll split to hit each rail into dash 8. So all of this stuff, with the exception of this fitting, which is the to step it back up to dash 10 to go back to the rail, all this stuff is dash 8. Okay, we've got a couple things from Radium, fuel pressure gauge, mechanical one, and a fitting to adapt it to one side of the fuel rail. This is kind of not necessary, but nice to have. I'm running a Holley and I'll have a fuel pressure sensor, and the Holley will read fuel pressure, but when you're initially setting the regulator, it's nice to be able to just see the fuel pressure as you're running it up. You don't have to have someone inside the truck telling you, like, hey, go up or go down or any other way. We're going to use a MagnaFuel fuel pressure regulator. There's the part number. This is a 1-to-1 boost reference regulator, so for every pound of pressure you put on it, it will add a pound of pressure to your fuel system. Again, I said Figueroa fittings, same with their line. So part of the reason why I'm using these guys, if you never assembled PTFE line before, it's a pain in the ass. Sucks. Their claim to fame is their AN line is supposed to be E85 safe. So we're going to test it because this is just standard AN line. It's not PTFE. Couple tools you're going to need for this job. Oh yeah, Motion Raceworks. That's the bracket to hold the fuel pressure regulator to the front of the engine. I'll show you that in a little bit when we install it. A couple tools that make this a little easier. These are made by Vibrant. Obviously Vibrant makes a lot of plumbing stuff for race cars, but these can also be bought at Home Depot. They're just wire shears. So like if you're cutting a big wire, that's what that's for. They cut a really nice line, and it won't fray as bad. If you try and use a cutoff wheel, I don't like doing that. I've done it, believe me, I've been there. Anyone who's put AN lines together has done it with the cutoff wheel and tape method. The only problem with it is, and especially with fuel systems, is when you use a cutoff wheel, it creates a lot of dust and wire particles and nylon and all that stuff. And on a fuel system or an oil system, if you're doing this for like a turbo or something like that, all that crap goes in the line. And then the first time you fire this thing up, all that trash goes right into your extremely expensive injectors or your turbo or whatever else that you're plumbing. Okay, camera keeps shutting off, don't know why. Anyways, all that trash goes into your fuel system or whatever you're using, so if you can avoid using a cutoff wheel, I get it, if that's all you have, that's all you have. Just make sure you clean out the hose really good. I've also seen people, I've never done it before, but they take a chisel, sharpen it real sharp, and then put it on the line and whack it with a hammer, and apparently it'll make a nice clean cut like this. Haven't done it, sounds like a pain. I'm going to use this because it's easier to do. AN line wrenches, again, not necessary. You can assemble AN lines with standard steel wrenches, but that being said, you spend a lot of money on these fittings. Even the eBay junk ones that suck are expensive. So if you bought nice, expensive fittings, the last thing you probably want to do is mar them all up with standard steel wrenches. These are, I think, Summit brand, and then this adjustable one's a Vibrant. I will warn you with the cheaper brand wrenches, this jaw right here will flex, and it can do the same thing that steel wrenches will, and it'll mar the fittings if you're like really cranking on them. These have worked because my fittings have been pretty easy to put together. Motion Raceworks makes a really nice set out of some nicer aluminum that won't flex as bad. And then some lube for the injectors and assembling fittings. You can use WD-40 also, really easy to get. This stuff is actually for paintball guns, which use O-rings. Everything we have is O-rings, so this should be fine. Only want to be careful when you're installing the injectors so you don't get this like in the tip of them and clog stuff up. Other than that, we'll get to it. We'll start assembling stuff. I'll show you how I mock up my line so we don't waste a bunch of fuel line, because the stuff's kind of expensive also. And we'll get the regular mounted also. Okay, first step is the regulator bracket mounts here, so we'll pull these two bolts out. Motion sends their bracket with two button head bolts that are nice, and I would probably use them if I had stock hardware, but I don't. These are actually ARP bolts, so we're going to reuse these. They're plenty long enough to grab the threads behind the cover here, and so just set those there. Okay, so here's the motion bracket. You can see it fits just like that, and then the regulator bolts to the top hole. You put your bolts back in. That one. that. Give it a little snug, a lot of snug. Alright, and we're ready to install the regulator. Okay, so again, assembling this stuff, got to be patient because this is the kind of stuff you run into, just not thinking ahead. So here's the regulator. I actually don't have hardware to install this, so what I'm gonna have to do is probably run to the hardware store and get a nut and bolt to bolt this on, either this way or that way. Probably do that way. This bracket's pretty thick and it's aluminum. I'm tempted to try and thread the hole. You see it's got a little width to it. I might do that actually. I'll just have to drill this to a larger size to accept that, and then we could just skip the nut and thread the thing down. Let me see what I got for hardware, and maybe I'll show you how to tap some stuff today too. Alright, so first step we're going to do is install our fuel injectors in the rails. So I'm going to come back to the regulator in a minute once I figure out what I want to do with that. So the injectors have O-rings on top and bottom. The biggest thing with these, let me show you real quick. So the biggest thing with these, you see an O-ring on the top and the bottom. This has two spots to mount it, and these also come off. So we're gonna have to play and figure out where the rail needs to be mounted and if these top hats are needed or not. But ideally, you want these O-rings installed as far as possible into the injector boss on both ends. The fuel rail, it's okay if they have like a little up and down movement, but you don't want it installed and you know your O-rings like right there, because you're hitting this thing with you know, I mean, at wide open throttle, 90 psi of fuel pressure, maybe more depending on your application, and it could blow the O-ring out, and then you have a fuel leak and a fire. And hot things are not far from this, so that would not be good. So we're gonna play around with this and see what length we need and install it that way. The other thing you want to do is put just a little bit of oil or WD-40 or some type of O-ring safe grease on these, so that way you don't nip the O-ring installing it. Okay, I want to show this because it's important. So as you can see, this is how you know you have the right fitment. We have very little vertical movement, and all that vertical movement, the O-ring never comes close to coming out of the boss. So if you do this and you start seeing the color of that O-ring coming up there, you've got too short of an injector. I'm not really sure there's a too tall of an injector. As long as your fuel rail can bolt down, that's really your limiting factor. So both sides done. We're going to start putting in the fittings so that I can show you how to make AN lines for this thing. Alright, so first step is we're going to put these ORB to AN fittings in each of the rails. So ORB stands for, if you didn't know this, O-ring boss. As you can see, there's an O-ring right there, and the other end's a tapered AN fitting. These fittings do not need any kind of PTFE tape, Teflon, nothing. No sealant, just that O-ring and a little lube, because, you know, never put it in dry, right? Oh, terrible joke. All right. So, let's see. On that, this is just so you don't cut the O-ring, basically. You don't want to glob it on, because again, this is your fuel system. You don't want grease going into these injectors, so they just thread in like that. Hopefully, yeah, there we go. Yeah, so it's -8 O-ring Boss to -8 AN is the setup for this. Hand tight, and then -8 wrench. You'll see fits perfectly, and give it a little snug, just like that. That's it. So we got to do that 3 more times. I'll time lapse it. Okay, so as you can see, we got our first fittings installed. The fuel injectors are installed. We've got the bracket installed. We need to put the regulator on and then mock up all the fittings, and I'll show you why. This helps you save from burning a bunch of fuel line on accident because you cut it too short or too long or whatever else. So just a sec, we'll be right back. All right, so thought I'd be smart here, and I was originally going to try and tap this bracket, but I was really concerned with how thick it was and if it would be enough for thread engagement to actually grab and not pull the threads out. And then I got to thinking, I'm like, oh, I'll be smart. I have a riv nut tool. If you don't know what that is, a riv nut tool is basically, these are riv nuts, and they're a rivet with threads in them, so you can make a threaded hole. And they're specifically designed for like thin pieces of sheet metal, so they'll squish and grab something pretty tiny like that bracket. So busted out the riv nut tool, drilled my hole, and then realized I don't have M8 dies to crush this riv nut. So I was like, oh, crap, now I got to do something different. So alas, all is not lost. I'll show you the cheat sheet, and this is actually really nice. If you want to use these and not buy, I think this tool is like $100 something bucks on Amazon, so it's not exactly cheap. It's not super expensive. The cheat sheet to this is whichever one you're using. In this case, it's an M8 by 1.25. You need an M8 bolt, an M8 nut, and 2 washers, and you can crush that sleeve with this cheapo little homemade tool. So I'll show you how to do that here in just a second. Riv nut, it's in the bracket. I've got my M8 bolt threaded into the riv nut with a nut and 2 washers. You're going to snug this nut up to everything, and then you're going to hold this one, the end of the bolt, and then turn the nut, and that will crush it. So I'm gonna grab here, do the best I can not to block the camera, and here we're going to start crushing it, and you'll see the rivet collapse. You gotta make sure. Okay, so you can see it's bulged, and now we have a threaded hole. So you can just take this whole thing, back it out. Oh, see how it's still spinning? Okay, so we got to go a little bit more. I didn't crush it enough. The tool is nice because it takes the guesswork out of it, and that's why it kind of pays to have it, because you just go until the tool stops. Okay, check this up a little better. So we didn't quite go far enough. Alright, there we go. All right, I think we got it now. There we go. All right, so now I got a nice crush on there. And we should be all set. See that? Pretty neat. All right, so now we can install our fuel pressure regulator. And we don't have a stupid backup nut either, so this is like permanently attached basically, so. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and prep our regulator for installing. See, we got the riv nut and bracket on. We're gonna go ahead and put all of our fittings in. So the first two are dash 8 ORB to dash 8 AN. And again, lubricate the O-rings, throw them in by hand. Okay. So these are your two inlets to your regulator. And then this, the outlet out the back, is your return to the tank. So this is a dash 8 ORB to dash 10 AN, because we're gonna run a dash 10 line all the way back to the tank. The reason for that is these regulators can actually get held up at that return, and it'll either make them work harder and get your fuel hotter, or they actually can't regulate enough and it'll hold back your fuel system from flowing as much as possible. So I'll explain kind of the routing once I start making the lines and all that. So just go ahead and give this a quick snug with the AN wrench and dash 8. Like so, tight. This port on the top with the red plug is actually where your fuel pressure sensor should go. So, all right, so that's ready for install. All right, so you can kind of see where this is going, right? Like how we're gonna plumb this, probably not. So, take our regulator, stick that there. And just like that. And I'll snug that up. Okay, so how this is gonna work is coming back from the back of the truck, we're gonna have a dash 10 feed that goes to the inlet of a Y, which is a dash 10, and the outlet split it to two dash 8s. So the split goes to the back of each fuel rail, so two dash 8s to the back. We're gonna flow all the way to the front, hit all 8 injectors, 4 and 4 on each side. Kids in their Hondas thinking they're cool. Anyways, so flow all the way to the front. You're gonna have two dash 8 fittings that come out the front here, and they're gonna hit each side of the regulator, and that's where we regulate fuel pressure. And then we have that dash 8 to dash 10 return, and that's gonna go straight back and all the way back to the tank. So the reason why we do this, this setup is called priority fueling, and it gives you the most consistent fuel pressure across the board. So you'll see a lot of LS setups where they just have a crossover with an AN line, and they'll put the regulator at the very end over there, so the fuel's got to come all the way around, crossover, and all the way around back there, or they'll do it post coming in. The problem with doing that, sorry, diesel truck driving by. The problem with doing that on higher horsepower setups is you can, every time you have an injector fire, you can have drops in fuel pressure because it's not regulating it till the very end. So you can imagine all that flow's got to get all the way over there before it gets regulated, and so it's just dropping it constantly, where versus if you do the regulator in the front, you're only regulating 4 injectors each side, and it keeps the pressure way more consistent, so a lot less likely to burn something up, a little more reliable, a little safer, and it's better flow also. So I'm going to go ahead and start building this out. Guys, the best way to do this is that I've learned, is to put all your fittings and your hose ends on with no hose in between, obviously. And then once your hose end is on, you can kind of eyeball and measure where you need to cut your hose. All right, so this is how I recommend building your hose ends. So go ahead and your giant piece of line, don't cut anything down yet. Just put one, pick a point where you want to start. I'm starting with the front fuel rails plumbing to the regulator. Put your first hose end on, okay? Installed correctly. I like to line up the flats so they look pretty. And go ahead and attach it to where it's supposed to go. So see that? Screw everything down so it looks good. Then mark where you need to make your cut. So you can see the edge of that PTFE tape is my cut line, where I'm going to cut the line. And this should get you the perfect length, or very close to it, enough to where you can kind of like fiddle with it to make it work. I like using this tape for marking it, because it won't hurt anything, and B, it's also good when you cut it, it'll keep it from fraying. So even with the loppers that I have, it will still fray a little bit, but not bad. So that's why I use the tape, just for ease of install. Okay, so how these AN fittings work is, here's the nut, hose ends is the correct technical name. Nut, hose end, the nut goes on first, so you just stick it in there. Sometimes you gotta twist it a little bit, and there's a shoulder in this nut, and you'll see in the bottom there. I don't know if you can see it very well, but there's a shoulder in there. You want the hose to bottom out on the shoulder, so it'll stop, it'll be even all around. Then take it, and you've got to push this fitting into there far enough to where the threads will start engaging that nut. So it'll go like that, and I'm gonna have to do it off camera because it takes a lot of force to get it there. So all right, that's one done. You can see the flats are almost touching. This is a tedious job, so just make sure you set enough time by so that you can take your time, and especially if it's hot out, take breaks and crap like that, because if you don't have the right tools, which I don't, I mean I have the AN wrenches, but as far as bench mounted vise, like that's the difference between hating your life doing this and it not being so bad. Nut on. Just like that. Just like that. Here's the ghetto rig way of doing this. I've got one of my AN wrenches, the adjustable one, in a non-mounted vise, but it just gives me something to hold on to. Tighten that up. Time for a satisfying part. Put my fuel pressure gauge on. So, this is NPT threaded. So National Pipe Thread. That means that you need tape on this. It will leak if you don't tape it. It's a tapered thread, but it still has to have PTFE tape or some kind of sealant, some kind of pipe sealant. There's a thing to grab it on the back of the gauge. Don't twist it with the gauge like I did, look real tight. I mean, to start the thread, it's fine, but you can break the gauge if you go too crazy. So there's some flats on the back there to grab it. All right. Dang. Looky there, that looks pretty good. Snug up all your fittings, tighten all your bolts, and you're pretty much home free. Well, these are some of the things you run into. I started doing the backside, and looks like, so I ordered some 45s thinking I'd have enough room, and I don't. So I'm gonna have to order, I'm gonna check and see if maybe Summit has some in stock. If they do, I'll run over there, grab some 90s, and that way I can finish this, because that's just the last. You can see I got both the hose ends on there, and I ran the hose back there. I need two -8 90s so that I can connect to this -8-10 Y. There's the part number for it, by the way, if you're doing this. This part's kind of hard to find. Anyways, it's basically done. It looks stupid good too. I like it. It's very clean. All right, had to pull the manifold back off so I could do the back lines. Here is the end result. This looks unintentional, but it was. I wanted this side shorter so that way it would kind of cant the Y fitting that way, because my feed's going to come from that way, so it's going to come up and hit that bottom 10AN, so it feeds both the rails, comes along to the front, crosses over, hits the regulator, and straight back to the return. They both come out together and back to the tank. So that's the idea, at least. Hopefully it works. I got a dash 10 cap around here somewhere right there. So put that on there. Now the fuel system is capped off, so you can't get crap in it. It's sealed from both ends. I got another one on the back of the regulator, so let's see if everything fits. Shit in a 5-pound bag, but I originally wanted to do this in a Miata. And it's in a truck, and I'm complaining about feeling like I'm running out of room, and there's literally miles of room compared to other vehicles, so it's just kind of funny. But it looks really good. I'm really happy with it. I think it's going to be function correctly, and it's also easy to service. So the lines are all easy to get to. Now that it's all AN, you just, if you need to make a new line, you back it off and put some new stuff in, put some new line in. You can see the Y just back there. So that'll be perfect. It's right above the transmission right now. And it's canted the right way towards the driver's side, which is where my fuel line feed and return are going to run. So that should be no problem. I got room for my gauge, or not gauge, fuel pressure sender up there. I can rotate those lines back just a hair and it should clear everything. And turbo line and all that's back on. The dipstick from the last episode that we did is back on, and it all fits. So I'm super happy with this. Getting close to being ready to bolt onto this manifold for the final time. Pretty excited. It's looking very clean, and I think it's going to work real good. So anyways, thanks for watching, guys. As always, really appreciate it. Appreciate the support. People have been sending me messages saying that they enjoyed what they saw and that they wanted to see more, so that motivates me to do more. And so anyways, thank you again. Appreciate it. Catch you on the next one.